Hello, lords, ladies, and lovelies. I am Kris Sihto. Welcome to Varthien. Today, I'm going to start taking a deep dive on my characters. Over the coming weeks, I will discuss each character from my book Dragon Silver, Wizard Gold. So this is the book right here. Post-it notes alongside. So each character's motivations, what makes them special, what makes them tick, and where each character may go in future books. Today I'm going to start with one of my favourite characters, as someone who is most visible for his absence at the start of the book, Norman. Now, this video is going to contain spoilers, so if you don't want the surprise ruined, turn away now, go and buy the book, go and read it before you take a look here. Now, when I first wrote Norman, I had no idea what or who he would become. My initial ideas around the book weren't very well fleshed out. I started writing it way back in 2012, and it was just kind of an idea of, oh, this is going to be fun. And Norman, in my mind, was somewhat like a Gandalf character, imposing and mysterious, but he was just meant to be a support character. But, time plays into these things. I stopped writing only 14,000 words into the piece, and I set it down for 11 years. And during that time, I had enormous upheavals in my own life. So with my changing experiences, when I picked the book back up in 2023, Norman started to evolve. This was made easier by the fact that I hadn't, at that stage, started writing Norman's side of the story. Sure, you got a glimpse of him through the 10-year-old eyes of Peter, but none of the present-day wizard had been exposed yet. For those of you who haven't read the book yet, there are two very important timelines occurring throughout. There's the present, where Peter, Norman's apprentice, is about to turn 18. And then there's the past, which is a series of flashbacks, most occurring in the year that Peter was 10. Now, in 2012, I'd written 8 chapters at that point, along with writing a protoplasmic version of what later became chapter 39. But I knew that I needed to start writing about Norman. So when I picked the book up again in 2023, I slipped the start of his present-day storyline into chapter 5, which cemented the fact that he was about to become much more pivotal. So who is Norman? So I'm going to read you a little bit of an excerpt. The boy smiled up at the man in the wide-brimmed leather hat and cloak. The man himself was nothing much to look at. His ample frame was mostly hidden beneath an oiled leather cloak, and in conjunction with the hat, made him look rather nondescript and brown. The round face was red and pockmarked and topped with faded ginger hair, which also seemed to infest his square beard and moustache in the places where it wasn't white. He propped himself up with a walking stick which seemed to have a lot more stick quality than it had walk quality. In fact, if it weren't for the strangeness of the wares, the boy would have thought this man a simple farmer. So, there's Norman through the eyes of Peter in chapter 1. The initial description was very much influenced by one of my favourite uncles. Growing up, it felt like he was some sort of kindly earth spirit, more magic than human. And just like my uncle, who was in his 30s when I was a child, I didn't want Norman, this person Norman, to be immensely old. He comes into the story through the eyes of 8-year-old Peter at the ripe old age of 36. And as we all know, that's ancient as far as a child is concerned. He takes on Peter as an apprentice. Maybe he sees something in Peter, maybe not. But we don't get to see the true reasons in the earliest chapters. Behind the scenes, however, later we get to see a complex history between Norman and Peter's parents that unfolds through flashbacks. Excuse me. And there's a question of whether Norman has taken Peter on because of Peter himself, or because of a feeling of guilt or obligation, or to hold on to the embers of a lost flame. That's rather a bad pun. See, Norman was friends with Peter's father, Gareth, when the two of them were still children. Gareth assisted Norman to cement his identity in the eyes of the people around them, because Norman is a trans man. And this being Norman's best friend and the object of his affections, when Gareth dies in a fire that Norman accidentally exacerbates, he's filled with grief and remorse and guilt and self-loathing. So Norman ran away from his problems, retreating from the world for a decade, hiding himself away from Peter's mother while still watching from a distance, lost in his own pain. So when he comes into Peter's life 10 years later, he and Peter's mother are both going through some very complicated things. When I started writing Norman, I didn't plan for him to be transgender. I used to hear about writers getting surprised by the direction that their characters grew in, and I was always really skeptical. How do you not know what's going to happen in your story? But it's true. Norman being transgender was a complete surprise to me when one day I was just writing and I realized it. Norman's transgender. It was just a revelation. And then I was in this state of, how do I avoid doing a JK on this one? I knew I had to make that knowledge explicit without having it become the only thing that he existed for. And the only way I knew how to do that would be to tie it into the story and have it mirror situations in Peter's story so that it became the story behind Norman's apprenticeship to the magus Albert, which is then brought full circle in present-day Norman's storyline, where he's seeing out the end of his mentor's life and then being thrust into responsibilities that he doesn't feel ready for. I think that that's come through. I think it's come through well. I approached my friend Des to beta read for me because Des is a trans man. And I initially just wanted him to look at the chapter where I introduced Norman's transness because I wanted someone who was a trans man to look at it and say, yeah, there's not really anything problematic in there. I'm not stepping on people's toes. He had these words to say. I personally love stories that, when they incorporate trans people, they touch on the facts of what happened, how they felt, and qualities of who they are as a person. I see when people go down the track of focusing too much on the transness, and it can get overwhelming and messy. What Kris does is focus on what is most important, the values of the person. This is a story about a person who just so happens to be trans. We're focusing on him. Here's a backstory, and here's some situations he gets into which relates to being trans, but it's not the main point. I really appreciated that quote from Des. Now, I said that Norman is one of my favourite characters, and I think that a lot of that favouritism comes from the depth of this character. He's flawed. He's trying to be better than he is, but he's up here stuck in his own head. He encounters all of these situations where the world is falling down around him, and he's trying to be the person who knows what to do. And he's just making it up as he goes along, like we all are. And of course, when there's a failure, he's not prepared for it. And time and again, he withdraws into isolation. Norman's going to continue to be a major character in the coming books. His entire world has expanded from this tiny patch of forest near Pugton to a much larger stage with enormous responsibility and no preparation. So the second book is going to be much more political in nature, and look at how he's going to start handling that. Next week, I'm going to take a deep dive into the character of Peter. It's going to be good. While you're here, please remember to like and subscribe. This is a new channel, and everything that you do will help me to get this channel up off the ground. So thank you. Be happy, be healthy, and I'll see you next time.